All that remained was to place the final needle. But just as Jasper moved to do it, the monster suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of danger, something far more terrifying than anything he had experienced before. Panicking, the monster screamed and begged Jasper to stop immediately. He shouted that he was the demon responsible for healing the larva, and that the man's body had already been consumed. If Jasper killed him now, he would end up killing that man as well. The demon quietly thought about the strange way humans talked about morality. Whenever a human life was involved, people suddenly acted righteous and conflicted, pretending to face some noble moral dilemma. In the demon's mind, Jasper would surely hesitate now. After all, if he chose to kill the demon, he would also be killing the human host along with it. But the demon had already prepared for that possibility. The eggs it had secretly planted inside this body would eventually spread through the man and infect others around him. One of the first victims would likely be the very girl who was currently spending time with Liam. And if one of those eggs managed to find the right kind of living vessel, someone with the potential to awaken the bloodline power of their ancestral founder, then the larva would inherit the collected memories of every other larva that had existed before it. The demon confidently assumed Jasper would hesitate. First, he would probably search for a complicated way to kill only the demon while saving the human host. And in the end, the demon believed, Jasper would fall right into the familiar trap of human hypocrisy and moral confusion. However, Jasper showed no interest in those complicated thoughts at all. Without even pausing to think about it, he calmly inserted the final 13th needle straight into the monster's head. The demon was completely stunned. It couldn't understand why this man hadn't hesitated for even a moment, or why he hadn't struggled with the so-called moral dilemma. After that, the creature collapsed onto the floor, completely drained of strength. As its consciousness began to fade, it couldn't stop thinking that Jasper was nothing like any human it had ever encountered before. When the monster finally died, its parasitic body separated from the human vessel it had been controlling. Unfortunately, the host's body had already been destroyed beyond saving, and the man died as well. At that exact moment, the girl who had been taking care of Liam suddenly felt a strange and painful sensation, as if something terrible had just happened to her father. Her pupils slowly turned a deep, glowing red, and something unnatural began shifting beneath the skin of her face. With every passing second, her features twisted further, gradually forming the disturbing outline of an insect-like face. Moments later, the transformation was complete. The girl had fully turned into a grotesque fly-like creature, yet her voice still carried a trace of emotion as she kept repeating that her father was dead. Without another word, the creature turned and walked out of the room. Meanwhile, Liam quickly noticed his credit card lying nearby, the same one he had given her earlier, and instinctively grabbed it. Seizing the opportunity while the girl stepped away, Liam rushed toward the door and ran out of the room before the creature could react. He slammed the door shut behind him and shouted desperately, claiming that someone was trying to kill him. Only seconds later, he realized the monster had begun violently pounding on the door from the other side. Each heavy blow left deep dents in the metal surface. From the other side, the creature demanded to know what was going on. She sounded confused, insisting that the patient was supposed to be resting inside the room with his girlfriend. Panicking, Liam shouted back that he could have accepted many things. He said he could even tolerate raising someone else's child if he had to. He might have forgiven her betrayal with Ivan that had already given him horns, as he bitterly described it. But one thing he absolutely could not forgive, he shouted angrily, was the fact that she had now turned into something so unbelievably ugly. As he finished yelling, he suddenly noticed that the monster had managed to crack the door open. The creature leaned forward and peered through the hole she had smashed in the door, looking at Liam with a strange and confused expression. Deep inside her mind, a small part of her subconscious still seemed to remember that she once loved him. But after hearing his cruel words, her expression hardened. She struck the door again with violent force and declared coldly that if he no longer loved her, then he had no reason to continue living. At that very moment, another figure suddenly appeared in front of Liam. It was Deputy Lee. He stood firmly in the hallway, gripping a long halberd in both hands. His stance looked steady and battle-ready, as if he had come prepared for a fight. The moment Liam saw him, he rushed over with tears forming in his eyes. He was deeply moved that the doctor had even brought a weapon specifically to protect him. Through trembling breaths, Liam told him that he would remain forever grateful for saving him. The doctor didn't respond immediately. Instead, memories from just a short while earlier flashed through his mind. Not long ago, he had collapsed into sleep in the doctor's lounge after completing an exhausting 10-hour surgery without taking a single break. Then suddenly he realized he had forgotten something important. Startled, he jumped up quickly from the sofa. That was when he remembered that Sean had wanted to speak with him about the hospital membership matter. As he turned around, his eyes landed on the halberd resting in the corner of the room. He picked it up without hesitation, planning to go confront the stubborn old man and teach him a lesson. But by a strange twist of fate, when he stepped out into the corridor, he unexpectedly encountered a terrifying monster. Luckily, he already had the weapon in his hands. He quickly told Liam to contact the special forces and report that a demon had appeared inside the hospital. At that moment, one of the orderlies ran up and informed him that the call had already been made and that special forces soldiers would arrive very soon. Just then, the demon suddenly lunged forward, launching a fierce attack toward the man. Liam reacted far too slowly. The only reason he survived was because Dr. Lee managed to shove him out of the way just before the creature's attack struck. Relieved and grateful, Liam was overjoyed that the doctor had once again saved his life. He even declared emotionally that he had completely lost faith in women, and that the most important person in his life now was his deputy. At that moment, someone nearby summoned several glowing scrolls and activated a powerful technique known as the execution of 1,000 spirits, directing the spell straight toward the demon. Within seconds, thick vines burst out and wrapped tightly around the creature, trapping it in place and preventing it from moving. It quickly became clear that the Special Forces team had already arrived at the hospital to eliminate the demon. One of the soldiers stepped forward and activated a powerful technique using his weapon, known as the illusion-breaking sword. The attack proved instantly fatal. The glowing blade pierced straight through the monster's throat. A moment later, the girl's body collapsed to the ground, and dark blood began slowly pooling beneath her. Soon afterward, an investigation team and a supply team arrived at the hospital and assured everyone that the remaining work would now be handled by them. One of the investigators examined the corpse and reported that the body had been emitting the energy signatures of second-rank demons, Takina and Larville, but those signals had now disappeared, confirming the demon's death. He also explained that during their approach they had detected the signal of another third-rank demon. That creature was likely the original parent organism responsible for spawning this one. Therefore, he ordered the battle squad warriors to locate and eliminate it as quickly as possible. Just then, something inside the dead girl's stomach suddenly began to move. The investigator immediately reported that a surge of high-energy activity had been detected. When everyone turned to look more closely, they could clearly see something violently shifting beneath the skin of her abdomen. In the next horrifying moment, her body suddenly tore open as a pair of massive demonic hands burst outward from inside. Seeing this terrifying scene, Liam collapsed onto the floor in shock, completely unable to understand where such a creature had come from. Everyone around looked up in horror as a gigantic demon slowly crawled out of the girl's torn body. Terrified visitors and hospital staff immediately began running toward the exits, desperately trying to escape. The creature looked like an enormous three-headed fly. Its size was monstrous, and with a single violent strike it smashed apart nearly half of the hospital building. People fled in absolute panic, doing everything they could to get as far away from the monstrous creature as possible. The only two people who remained completely calm in the chaos were Levi and Jasper. Jasper looked confused and asked why everyone was suddenly running away from the hospital. Levi quietly pointed toward the massive creature in the distance. It turned out to be a 7th-level demon known as Larval Tahina, the ancient founder of the entire clan. The monstrous demon glared at Levi and Jasper and declared that it would take revenge on them for what they had done. Jasper stared at the creature, clearly puzzled. To him, it just looked like a very large fly. But Levi said they should take a closer look, because strangely enough, he thought the creature looked rather cute. The story then shifts back 10 minutes earlier. With a trace of sadness in his eyes, Jasper quietly reported that his experimental subject appeared to have died. He realized that something unusual had indeed entered the man's body. Jasper had actually wanted to save it and study it carefully, but he never expected that the test subject would suddenly die so quickly. Levi calmly told Jasper that none of this was really his fault. He reminded him that Jasper had already done everything he could to save the man. Sometimes things simply didn't work out, and if their treatment failed, then maybe that man had been destined to die from the very beginning. But Jasper still couldn't calm himself down. His mind was racing with fear and guilt. He kept thinking that the authorities would accuse him of murder and throw him into prison. Levi shrugged and replied that since they had treated the patient together, they would share the responsibility together as well. Then Levi suddenly lifted his hand and smashed the window of their hospital room with a sharp strike. Glass scattered everywhere as he casually announced that they should simply escape from the hospital before anyone started asking difficult questions. Instead of panicking, Jasper's eyes lit up with excitement. A wide grin spread across his face as he said the idea actually sounded pretty fun. He suggested that they should jump straight down from the window and make their escape. Nearby, the injured nurse who had survived the demon's attack was quietly watching the entire scene unfold. As she watched them, she couldn't help thinking about how strange these two men were. They might be a little crazy, but despite that, they had still saved her life. For that alone, she felt deeply grateful toward them. Levi and Jasper both noticed her gaze and gave her a friendly smile. Then they stepped up onto the windowsill together, preparing to leave the hospital behind. Levi jumped first. Despite the enormous height of the building, he landed lightly on his feet, as if the fall had barely affected him at all. After landing, he quickly looked around the area, carefully checking to make sure no one nearby had noticed their unusual escape. Fortunately for them, everyone around the hospital had already fled in panic after hearing the news that a terrifying demon had appeared inside the building. Levi then helped Jasper climb down safely. Afterward, the two of them crouched quietly in the bushes, waiting patiently for the remaining people to run away from the hospital. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the headquarters of the Special Forces. They had just received urgent news reporting the appearance of a 7th-ranked demon. According to the report, their current warriors were only capable of dealing with enemies up to the 4th rank, so they urgently needed reinforcements. One-Eyed clearly didn't look happy when he heard this report. His expression darkened, but he understood that the situation left him with very few options. He turned toward the exit of the command room and announced that he would personally head there to deal with the situation. Tracy quickly stepped forward to stop him. She warned that he absolutely couldn't go himself. They still didn't know the rank of the demon that controlled all the others, and the sudden appearance of a 7th-ranked demon was far too suspicious to be considered a coincidence. She reminded him that as a national-level warrior, he had a much bigger responsibility. If another unexpected threat appeared, he needed to remain at headquarters to coordinate their response. Pointing toward a nearby squad of soldiers, she declared that they would go instead. This was an elite 8th-rank combat team known as the Sacred Duty Group. The warriors had only just returned from another mission, and they looked shocked to learn they were being sent into another dangerous situation so soon. Tracy confidently stated that their strength should be more than enough to suppress a 7th-ranked demon. Back near the hospital, Levi and Jasper were still quietly observing the giant monster from their hiding place. Jasper suddenly turned to his friend and casually asked if he was feeling hungry. Meanwhile, the enormous demon glared toward the two boys with burning hatred. Its entire body radiated murderous intent as it prepared to take revenge on them. At that moment, Levi suddenly heard the familiar voice of the system in his mind. It informed him that it had detected a source of extremely high-energy food nearby. According to the system, consuming it could suppress hunger for up to 7 weeks, and the distance to the target was currently 0 meters. Just then, the monster stretched out one of its massive demonic arms, preparing to crush the boys with a powerful attack. However, Levi barely even looked at the incoming strike. He seemed far more interested in what the system was telling him, especially the recommended cooking method for preparing this particular ingredient. He casually explained the system's words to Jasper. At that exact moment, one of the Special Forces soldiers nearby shouted at them urgently, warning them to run away immediately. But Levi ignored the warning completely. Instead, he calmly extended one finger and lightly touched the monster's giant claw. In the very next moment, a massive beam of energy suddenly pierced straight through one of the monster's heads, blasting it apart into countless fragments. The demon let out a horrifying scream filled with pain and shock, while Jasper watched the scene with wide eyes and obvious excitement. Levi then casually told his friend that according to the system's calculations, that attack alone should be enough to kill the creature. Jasper blinked in confusion. He couldn't understand how Levi planned to finish the monster off, especially since the creature was still incredibly large and powerful. Suddenly, Levi bent his knees and launched himself upward in a powerful leap, shooting straight toward the monster's remaining two heads. As he flew through the air, he raised his hand, aiming directly for one of the creature's enormous eyes. With a devastating strike, the monster's middle head shattered into pieces under Levi's blow. The nearby Special Forces soldier watched this unbelievable scene in complete shock, unable to believe that a single person possessed such terrifying power. He stared at Levi in disbelief, wondering who this mysterious young man really was. The monster's final remaining head continued to fight desperately. Even in its weakened state, it was determined to kill Levi at any cost. But Levi moved faster. With another sudden jump, he appeared right in front of the monster's last head. The demon resisted fiercely and slammed its forehead into Levi's body, knocking him down to the ground. Levi quickly regained his balance and smoothly landed back on his feet. The monster then began slashing wildly with its claws, but Levi calmly dodged every single attack with ease. At that moment, the system activated a defensive ability called the Impenetrable Golden Body. With the invisible barrier surrounding him, Levi stopped dodging entirely because the monster's attacks could no longer reach him. Taking advantage of this moment, Levi stepped forward and grabbed one of the monster's claws firmly. Then he delivered a powerful punch straight into the creature's paw. The impact was so devastating that the entire claw shattered into countless fragments. Meanwhile, Jasper was thinking about something completely different. Levi had earlier said the monster looked cute, but Jasper personally thought it was incredibly disgusting. He even wondered if they might end up arguing, because their tastes were so different. But when he saw Levi continuing to fight the monster so seriously, Jasper suddenly realized something. Levi must simply be hungry. That meant he was probably fighting the giant fly because he planned to eat it. Soon afterward, Levi defeated the monster and calmly returned to stand beside his friend. Jasper finally decided to confess his thoughts. He admitted that he personally didn't think the giant fly looked cute at all, and asked Levi whether that meant their tastes were different. In response, Levi casually waved his hand and tossed the corpse of the dead monster far away. He calmly explained that he never thought the creature was cute either. In fact, he actually believed the fly looked extremely ugly. Hearing that answer, Jasper felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He was extremely happy that he and his friend wouldn't end up arguing after all. Levi simply smiled at his reaction. However, the system's voice suddenly reminded him that if he had eaten that fly, he could have suppressed his hunger for 7 entire weeks. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, a group of Special Forces soldiers worked quickly to stabilize the crumbling walls of the damaged inpatient department. They struggled to maintain the protective barrier while the medical healers rushed around treating the wounded patients and staff. One of the women encouraged everyone to hold on a little longer, promising that their commander and additional reinforcements would arrive soon. Unfortunately, the man who had been monitoring the energy signals earlier had become trapped beneath a pile of rubble. Despite this, his tablet displayed an important message confirming that the 7th-level demon, Larval Tahina, the founder of the clan, had been eliminated. After all the chaos settled down, Jasper and Levi quietly continued on their way. Since they had decided not to eat the giant fly, they agreed it was best to continue their escape. Levi still felt extremely hungry and tired after the fight, but he nodded and agreed with Jasper that they should keep moving. However, after walking for a short while, Levi suddenly collapsed to the ground from complete exhaustion. The system quickly reported that Levi had used an enormous amount of energy during the battle, more than he had in a very long time, and that his body now needed immediate replenishment. Seeing his friend collapse like that, Jasper immediately sat down beside him and burst into tears, convinced that Levi was about to die. Just then, an elite squad of Special Forces soldiers came running toward them at full speed. The arriving Special Forces soldiers immediately looked around the clearing in confusion. One of them pointed toward Levi and asked what had happened to that guy lying on the ground. Another quickly asked the more important question, where exactly had the 7th-ranked demon gone? One of the warriors carefully examined the surrounding area and reported that faint traces of powerful demonic energy were still lingering in the air, suggesting that a high-ranking demon had indeed been present not long ago. His partner then approached the remains of the fallen demon and crouched down to inspect the corpse more closely. After a short examination, he calmly confirmed that the creature was already dead. Hearing this, 2 warriors immediately rushed over. One of them was a tall, muscular, bald man named Frank, an 8th-rank warrior from the Sacred Duty Squad of the Supreme Academy of Buddhists. Beside him stood Stephen, another 8th-rank warrior from the Sacred Duty Squad of the Supreme Academy of Taoists. Both men stared at the destroyed demon in disbelief. They simply couldn't understand who could have possibly defeated such a powerful monster before they even arrived. At that moment, Cheryl, an 8th-rank warrior from the Sacred Duty Squad of the Supreme Academy of Doctors, approached the unconscious Levi and carefully checked his condition. After examining him, she said he was fine and had only fainted. However, she found it strange that an ordinary person could exhaust such an extreme amount of energy without suffering internal injuries. She then moved on to examine Jasper and calmly reported that he also seemed physically fine. Still, she frowned slightly, noting that his energy channels strangely resembled those of an elderly person rather than someone his age. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad members informed Cheryl that they would head inside the building to help rescue the remaining people trapped in the hospital. Just then, another member of the squad emerged from the nearby forest and called out to Cheryl respectfully, addressing her as the eldest. It was Lewis, a 4th-rank warrior from the Special Forces combat team. He excitedly told her that the 2 boys lying nearby were actually the ones who had defeated the demon. However, before he could finish explaining the situation, Lewis suddenly began coughing violently. A moment later, he spat out blood. Cheryl quickly rushed over to him and gently told him not to waste his remaining energy speaking. Without hesitation, she activated the 2nd form of the pill's secret technique, known as the 6-fold recovery skill. After preparing the medicine, she carefully offered a healing pill to the injured young warrior. Once he had taken the pill, Cheryl helped him sit beside a nearby tree and told him to rest. She explained that it was fortunate he had witnessed the entire incident. For now, he needed to recover his strength while she went inside the building to assist the injured. She promised to return afterward. With a powerful leap, she immediately launched herself forward and landed inside the damaged hospital building. Not long afterward, ambulances began arriving one after another. Medical teams quickly started rescuing the wounded and transporting them to nearby hospitals. The paramedics soon approached Levi and Jasper to examine them. After checking carefully, they concluded that neither of them had any visible injuries. It appeared that Levi had simply fainted after taking a powerful blow. Since their condition wasn't life-threatening, the paramedics decided that the more seriously injured victims needed to be transported first. For the moment, they told the 2 boys to stay where they were. Levi was still unconscious, so one of the paramedics spoke to Jasper and suggested that if he accompanied them later, they could help him contact his family to pick him up. The moment Levi heard the word family, his eyes suddenly snapped open. Jasper immediately brightened with relief when he saw his friend wake up. At the same time, Lewis waved at them from a short distance away and called out enthusiastically, telling Levi that what he had done earlier was incredibly cool. But Levi suddenly remembered something troubling. Not long ago, they had technically killed someone while dealing with the demon. He immediately assumed that all these people had come to investigate them. The protagonist whispered that he had no idea what these officials planned to do next. Because of that, he thought it would be much safer if they quietly left the area right now. Jasper's face lit up with excitement again when he heard this suggestion. He seemed very pleased with the idea. Without wasting another second, the 2 boys slipped away and crawled deeper into the forest, completely ignoring Lewis as he tried unsuccessfully to call them back. A short while later, the paramedic returned to the clearing carrying a bun he had brought for the 2 boys. But when he arrived, he discovered that they had already disappeared. Soon afterward, Levi and Jasper wandered out of the forest and into the city. The white-haired boy looked around curiously and said that this was the first time they had ever walked through such a busy street filled with so many strangers. Levi calmly replied that if anything dangerous happened, he would protect his friend. Jasper nodded proudly and replied that he was always ready to protect Levi as well. The two boys then grabbed each other's hands and loudly declared that they were best friends forever, which caused several nearby pedestrians to stare at them in confusion and fear. Not long afterward, they wandered back to the place where they had recently caught and eaten an octopus. They lay down comfortably on the grass and happily reminisced about that memorable day. While relaxing there, Jasper suddenly noticed something unusual nearby and pointed toward the road. Parked along the roadside was a suspicious car. Inside it, a young boy could be seen tied up. At first glance, Jasper assumed the child was simply being bullied. However, the situation was much more serious. The boy had actually been kidnapped. One of the kidnappers held a gun against him while calling the child's parents to announce that their son had been taken. The kidnapper shoved the phone toward the boy and ordered him to speak. The child calmly told his parents to come rescue him, sounding oddly indifferent. The criminal then demanded $50 million as ransom. But the boy suddenly interrupted him and casually said that the amount was far too low. If they were going to negotiate properly, they should ask for at least $500 million. After all, previous kidnappers usually started at $100 million. He explained calmly that kidnapping was a very risky operation, so the reward should match the danger involved. The driver glanced at his partner in surprise and commented that the kid actually seemed to know what he was talking about. Taking the advice seriously, the kidnapper shouted into the phone that the parents should prepare $500 million immediately. He began explaining where to deliver the money, but the boy interrupted him again. The boy calmly explained that negotiations didn't work like that. They needed to set strict deadlines and clearly explain what consequences would follow if the demands were ignored. Only then would they truly have leverage. The two kidnappers stared at the boy in confusion, completely unsure how a child could be talking like this. Even so, the kidnapper continued the conversation with the parents, following the boy's instructions about what to say next. The boy added that they should warn the parents not to contact the police and claimed they would immediately know if they did. However, the kidnapper admitted awkwardly that he didn't actually know anyone in the police force. The boy calmly explained that it didn't matter whether it was true or not. The threat was simply a psychological bluff. Most parents would be too afraid to risk their child's life by involving the police. After following the boy's instructions, the kidnapper finally ended the call, feeling strangely proud of how convincing he had sounded. The boy nodded and said the conversation had gone well. However, he pointed out one major problem. The call had lasted far too long, and his family owned equipment capable of tracing the caller's location. He calmly added that they had probably already located the kidnappers and that his personal security team would likely arrive within 10 minutes. Hearing this, the kidnapper suddenly stood up and angrily pointed his gun at the boy, accusing him of trying to trick them. The boy shrugged and explained that he couldn't possibly memorize all the complicated negotiation phrases. He had to dictate everything step by step, which was why the call lasted exactly 47 minutes and 8 seconds. The kidnapper exploded with rage and threatened to shoot the boy immediately if the money didn't arrive soon. His partner tried to calm him down, reminding him that $500 million was at stake. Meanwhile, the boy calmly noted that they had about 8 minutes and 37 seconds left. At that moment, Jasper suddenly leaned toward the car window and curiously asked what kind of argument they were having. The kidnapper turned toward the unexpected stranger with a threatening glare and said they didn't need any witnesses around. Without hesitation, he raised his gun and fired directly at Jasper. Jasper calmly watched as the bullet sped toward his face. But just before it could hit him, Levi's hand suddenly appeared and caught the bullet in his palm. Levi stepped forward protectively and glared at the kidnapper. He told Jasper that he had seen weapons like this on television before and that the man had clearly tried to hurt him. Jasper nodded seriously and asked Levi to avenge him. However, Jasper quickly added an important reminder. Levi might be strong now, but killing people was illegal. Since they were already running from trouble, Levi needed to hold back his strength and make sure not to kill the man. Meanwhile, the kidnapper stared at them in complete disbelief, unable to understand how someone had just stopped a bullet with their bare hand. While he was still trying to process what had happened, Levi suddenly rushed forward and punched him hard in the stomach. The impact sent the man flying straight out of the car. Seeing his partner thrown aside like that, the second kidnapper immediately jumped out of the car and ran toward him, trying to help him up. Jasper watched the man lying on the ground and quietly wondered if he would survive the hit. Levi looked at him calmly and replied that the man was still alive. According to him, he had only used a very small amount of strength, so the blow was light compared to what he was capable of. After that, the two of them turned their attention to the young boy who was still tied up inside the car. Jasper proudly explained that they had chased away the bad people who were bullying him. Hearing this, the boy calmly asked them if they could untie the ropes. A moment later, they loosened the ropes and helped free the boy from the seat. Once he stepped out of the car, the young man looked at them thoughtfully and commented that they didn't seem like ordinary people. Then he glanced down at their strange clothing and quickly realized something. Those pajamas looked exactly like the uniforms worn by patients in a psychiatric hospital. Suddenly, it made sense to him. They must have escaped from a mental institution. Just as he finished thinking that, Levi's stomach suddenly growled loudly. The sound echoed awkwardly in the quiet clearing, reminding everyone that he had become hungry again. The boy looked at them for a moment and then smiled slightly. Since they had saved him from the kidnappers, he said he would treat them to a meal as a way of thanking them. Without wasting time, the three of them quickly left the clearing together. The boy explained that within about 3 minutes his family's private security team would arrive, so it would be better if they disappeared before that happened. Not long afterward, several helicopters arrived in the area carrying rescue teams whose mission was to ensure the safety of the young master. The rescuers quickly located the two kidnappers. The driver was pretending to help his injured partner while the rescuers questioned him, asking whether he had seen the kidnapped boy anywhere. At that moment, a clever idea suddenly formed in the driver's mind as he tried to save himself from suspicion. He told the rescuers that he had indeed seen a very handsome young boy earlier. According to his story, 2 suspicious men wearing hospital pajamas had kidnapped the child, and he and his brother had tried to stop them but were attacked instead. He even added that they had simply asked the 2 strange men if everything was all right, but those men suddenly beat them up without warning. Just then, the injured kidnapper suddenly screamed loudly, complaining that he was in unbearable pain. Realizing his partner might accidentally reveal the truth, the driver quickly rushed over and covered up the situation. He pretended to be overjoyed that his friend had regained consciousness while subtly preventing him from speaking. The rescuers watched the strange scene with confused expressions. One of them quietly mentioned that the driver's voice sounded oddly familiar to him. Before they could think more about it, another rescuer announced that the target's location had been confirmed and they needed to leave immediately to provide assistance. Once the rescuers hurried away, the driver finally let out a long breath of relief. He felt proud that he had managed to stay calm at such a critical moment and successfully talk his way out of trouble. Meanwhile, the story shifted back to the ruins of the destroyed hospital where the battle had taken place earlier. Lewis excitedly told the warriors from the 8th Division that the mysterious boy had jumped directly into the head of a 7th-ranked demon and killed it with incredible power. According to Lewis, the strength that boy displayed seemed almost comparable to the power of their own leader. One of the 8th-rank warriors from the Sacred Duty Squad of the Manhwa Academy, Vincent, stepped forward and asked where that mysterious boy was now. Stephen chuckled lightly and replied that the boy had apparently already left after saving people. He didn't care about fame or recognition, which Stephen believed was truly the behavior of a real master. Lewis suddenly said that he clearly remembered what the 2 boys looked like. He planned to draw their portraits and send them to the information department so they could quickly track them down, because the city definitely needed heroes like that. With that idea in mind, Lewis picked up a canvas and began carefully drawing their faces. After a while, he proudly handed the completed canvas to his colleagues and explained that before entering the Higher Academy of Buddhists, he had originally wanted to become an artist. He believed he could paint extremely realistic portraits. The soldiers looked at the drawing and politely commented that the artwork was indeed very good. They assumed the information department should be able to locate the mysterious heroes by evening. However, when Frank stepped closer and examined the painting carefully, his expression suddenly changed to one of horror, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. To him, the so-called portrait looked less like a realistic drawing and more like something a small child might scribble during playtime. Meanwhile, the story moved back to the city where Levi and Jasper, together with their new friend, had arrived at a very expensive restaurant. Soon an entire table was filled with delicious food. Waitresses moved back and forth constantly, bringing more and more dishes as the meal continued. The waitresses quietly noticed that the two boys looked like they had escaped from a hospital. On top of that, they were accompanied by a small child. They began to wonder whether these strange guests could really afford to pay at such a luxurious five-star restaurant. One of the waitresses whispered that she clearly remembered seeing identical hospital pajamas in a psychiatric hospital before. After a while, the boy introduced himself as Christopher and asked his new friends whether the amount of food on the table was enough for them. Levi calmly replied that he was still quite hungry and could easily eat more. Meanwhile, Jasper politely thanked Christopher for inviting them and for generously paying for their meal. After eating for a while, the three of them decided it was a good time to properly introduce themselves and get to know each other. The waitresses kept bringing more and more dishes to the table, and it felt as if the endless feast would never stop. One waitress noticed that Levi had already eaten 7 large dishes. She began to worry, but not about the bill. Instead, she was afraid that he might collapse right there in the restaurant from overeating, which could cause serious trouble for the establishment. After watching him for a while, Christopher turned to Levi again and asked if he was finally full. Levi honestly admitted that he still wasn't completely full. However, the voice of the system in his mind reminded him that no matter how much he ate, his hunger would never truly disappear. So he decided to stop eating for now. At that moment, Jasper leaned closer and reminded him that Christopher had kindly treated them. If Levi stopped eating too early, it might seem disrespectful to the person who invited them. Meanwhile, one of the waitresses quietly stepped aside and secretly decided to call the police, reporting that suspicious guests who might not be able to pay their bill were inside the restaurant. However, Christopher calmly took out his money and paid the entire bill without hesitation. He then confidently walked out of the restaurant with his 2 new friends, leaving the waitress standing there in shock. Soon afterward, the 3 of them left the restaurant together and continued walking through the busy city streets. Across the street, Jasper suddenly noticed a shop called Video Game World. Excitedly, he said he had seen places like that on television and really wanted to go inside. Christopher laughed and said that it looked like they didn't know much about arcade games. He offered to show them everything inside. The 3 of them entered the shop together, where rows of colorful arcade machines filled the room with flashing lights and loud sounds. Unfortunately, no matter which game Jasper tried, he couldn't manage to defeat Christopher. Frustrated, Jasper turned to Levi and asked him to take revenge for him by beating Christopher at the games. However, Jasper quickly realized that even Levi lost to Christopher in the games. Christopher proudly explained that the games here were simply too easy for him. According to him, he had never lost before. He even joked that even if he tried to lose on purpose, it would still be difficult because the games were so simple. Instead of arguing, Levi calmly punched the arcade machine. The screen shattered instantly under the impact. Levi then casually declared that now he had finally won the game. After that, the 3 of them left the arcade together. Jasper felt very satisfied that his friend had taken revenge for him. Christopher quietly thought about how strong Levi must be. When he remembered the punch Levi used against the kidnapper earlier, he was convinced that the man should have been seriously injured. Levi casually explained that his strength was actually much weaker right now because he was still hungry and extremely tired. While they were talking, Levi didn't even notice the small red that suddenly appeared on his forehead. A sniper somewhere nearby had already aimed and fired. Jasper and Christopher turned their heads toward Levi just in time to see him collapse toward the ground after being struck by the powerful shot. In the very next instant, the calm of the room shattered violently as Christopher's security team smashed through the windows. Glass exploded inward with a deafening crash, scattering sharp fragments across the floor as the armed guards stormed into the room with aggressive urgency. The guards immediately barked strict commands, shouting for everyone to stay completely still and raise their hands where they could be seen. Without hesitation, they lifted their guns and aimed them directly at the confused patients of the mental hospital. Jasper leaned desperately over his friend, shaking him gently and pleading for him to wake up. His voice trembled with fear, and his heart pounded wildly as panic slowly crept into his mind. Meanwhile, the armed men kept their guns firmly trained on him. One of them coldly warned that if Jasper made even the smallest movement, they would not hesitate to put a bullet straight through his forehead. At that tense moment, Christopher pushed away the guard's hand that had been covering his mouth. Regaining control, he urgently ordered the rest of his men not to shoot and to hold their fire immediately. But the command came just a little too late. One of the guards had already pulled the trigger, and the gunshot echoed loudly as the bullet raced toward Jasper's head. In that critical final second, someone suddenly grabbed the white-haired young man by the shoulder and shoved him aside. The sudden movement caused the deadly bullet to miss its mark and fly harmlessly past him. It was Levi. Somehow he had regained consciousness. Without even a moment of hesitation, he sprang to his feet with shocking speed, seized the guard's weapon, and snapped the gun in half as if it were nothing more than a fragile toy. Then Levi grabbed the stunned guard by the throat with one hand and effortlessly lifted him into the air, holding him there as if the man weighed almost nothing. Seeing this terrifying display of strength, the remaining guards quickly raised their pistols and pointed them directly at the protagonist. However, their hands trembled uncontrollably with fear. After all, they had personally seen this man get shot in the head just moments ago, yet now he stood there perfectly fine. Christopher quickly stepped forward again and firmly ordered his guards to lower their weapons. He explained that these people had not harmed him and that there was no reason to attack them. "They're my friends," he said calmly. The guards exchanged confused glances with one another before looking back at their master. Though they clearly didn't understand, they had no choice but to obey his command. Christopher then walked up to Levi and sincerely apologized for the actions of his security team. He explained that they had opened fire without understanding what was really happening. To show how serious he was, Christopher even bowed his head respectfully before his new friend, asking him to forgive the mistake that had just happened. He added that if Levi truly considered him a friend, then he should please release the head of his personal security and forgive them for what they had done this time. The main character slowly turned his cold, intimidating gaze toward the young boy, his expression dark and threatening as he considered the request. At that moment, Jasper quickly stepped into the conversation. He gently explained that Christopher really was their friend and that true friends should protect each other and learn how to forgive. Hearing those words from Jasper, Levi remained silent for a moment. Eventually, he relaxed his grip and decided to let the frightened guards go. But just as the tension began to fade, Levi suddenly lost consciousness. His body went limp, and he collapsed heavily onto the floor. At that moment, the system quietly reported that the extreme hunger caused by the side effect of opening the inner world had finally reached its critical limit, forcing the host into suspended animation to protect his life. Worried, Jasper quickly leaned down and pressed his ear against his friend's chest, desperately trying to hear whether Levi's heart was still beating. When he finally heard the steady rhythm of Levi's heartbeat, Jasper let out a long breath of relief and explained that his friend had simply fallen asleep again. He even told Christopher that the last time Levi had suddenly fallen asleep like this, he had remained unconscious for 3 full days before finally waking up. Not long afterward, a car arrived outside the store. One of the family butlers escorted Christopher into the vehicle, and just then the radio began broadcasting shocking news about a 7th-ranked demon appearing at the emergency hospital earlier that day. Hearing this, Christopher quietly wondered what the special forces were doing right now and whether they had already dealt with the dangerous situation. The radio soon reported that the demon had already been defeated by 2 mysterious masters. At the same time, the strange drawing created by Lewis was being displayed on massive billboards all across the country. Christopher couldn't help but think that everyone there must have completely lost their minds. Meanwhile, the butler carefully carried both Jasper and the unconscious Levi into the car. Christopher calmly instructed them to bring the 2 boys to a mental hospital. The driver then asked what had happened to the kidnappers who had taken Christopher earlier. Christopher casually replied that they had already run away and that chasing them was pointless. The story then shifts to the Special Forces Control and Monitoring Center, where it becomes clear that 12 hours have already passed since the composite sketches of the people who defeated the 7th-ranked demon were released. Despite the nationwide search, they still had not received any useful information about the mysterious individuals. Frank was shocked that everyone seemed completely confident in the accuracy of the portraits. At that exact moment, Tracy suddenly entered the office. The sharp sound of her high heels striking the floor echoed through the room as she walked in with an intimidating presence. Without saying a word at first, she angrily threw a tablet onto the table. The screen displayed the same drawing that had already spread across every major news outlet. Looking around the room with clear irritation, she demanded to know who had given permission for that ridiculous image to be broadcast publicly. She continued scolding them, saying the soldiers clearly hadn't thought at all about the reputation of the special forces. Then she asked if any of them had actually seen the comments people were posting online. Lewis had secretly hoped that the public would admire his drawing skills, but Tracy quickly crushed that hope by explaining that most people online were saying the special forces had completely lost their minds. Hearing that, Louis became deeply depressed and lowered his head in embarrassment. Surprisingly, Frank seemed to be the only person in the room who looked somewhat pleased. Realizing this, Tracy's anger turned toward the 8th rank warriors. She had expected them to be more reliable than the others, but in reality they had acted just as foolishly. She firmly announced that their 3-month vacation would officially be canceled in just 3 days. Instead, the new recruits would begin training at a mental hospital under the supervision of the Sacred Duty Squad. Lizzie looked completely miserable as he realized that this entire disaster had started because of the drawing he had created. However, Vincent tried to comfort him, saying that everyone in the squad actually believed he was a talented artist. Several of the guys gathered around Lewis to cheer him up. They insisted that his drawing looked extremely realistic and that they truly didn't understand why people disliked it so much. Watching this scene, Frank suddenly realized that he seemed completely out of place within their strange group. Just then, the one-eyed man walked into the office. He casually mentioned that he had only just returned, yet he could already hear that the squad had managed to cause another problem. Looking around the room suspiciously, he asked what ridiculous thing they had just aired on television this time. Frank immediately assumed that the one-eyed man must also realize how absurd the drawing looked. At least someone here seemed to still have common sense. However, when the one-eyed man picked up the tablet and saw the drawing clearly, his face twisted in pure shock. He stared at the screen in horror, unable to believe that he was seeing those people again. The story then shifts to a psychiatric clinic. Director Sean decided to call Lee and check on his condition after hearing about the appearance of a 7th-ranked demon at the hospital the day before. Lee explained that many people had been injured during the incident, including both patients and members of the Special Forces. He also expressed hope that those who had died because of the demon could rest peacefully. After listening quietly, the director gently advised Lee to get more rest since there were still many patients who would need his help later. Lee then mentioned that the demon had appeared near the inpatient department, and 2 mental patients from their hospital were also supposed to have been there at that exact time. From the way he said it, it was obvious he believed those 2 unfortunate patients had most likely been killed by the terrifying monster. However, Lee suddenly told the director to wait for a moment before drawing any conclusions. For a brief period, both men remained silent on the phone, unsure of what to say next. But soon afterward, they both quietly smiled. They realized that if those 2 troublesome patients had really died during the demon incident, it might actually be the only piece of good news from that terrible day. After the call ended, the director sighed softly and reflected on how life and death were often controlled by fate, something no one could truly change. Just then, one of the hospital orderlies knocked and stepped into the office. He reported that the man who had brought the patients from room 666 was currently waiting outside and wished to speak with the director. The orderly quickly added one important detail. Both of those patients were still alive. Hearing this unexpected news, the director froze for a moment and realized that he had celebrated far too early. Soon afterward, he contacted Lee again. This time his voice carried a hint of guilt as he admitted that when Lee had first come to him to register for the subscription, he had not been entirely fair. He confessed that he hadn't really considered Lee's feelings at the time, and now he sincerely wanted to apologize for the way he had handled the situation. Lee paused for a moment before responding, and then he quietly said that, surprisingly, this was the first time he had actually been glad to hear something from the director. After a short pause, the director carefully asked whether it might still be possible to arrange that subscription after all. Lee explained that since the 2 patients they had been discussing were no longer alive, it technically could be done now. However, he also pointed out that such a subscription would probably bring no real profit to the director. Even so, Sean firmly insisted. He said that if they went through with it, he would at least have more chances to see his partner. Hearing that, Lee found himself thinking about how, lately, men seemed to be paying him an unusual amount of attention. After reflecting on it for a second, he jokingly concluded that it must simply be because he was just that incredibly charming. Still, Lee decided to clear things up right away. He bluntly explained that he was a man and that he had no romantic interest in other men. However, he added that the next time he visited the principal, he would still request an exception so that Sean could receive the membership. With that matter settled, the two men said their goodbyes and ended the call. What Lee didn't realize was that at that exact moment, there were actually guests sitting quietly inside Sean's office. Those visitors turned out to be Christopher and his loyal butler. Sean warmly thanked Christopher for bringing Levi and Jasper back safely, explaining that the two boys were almost like family to him, and everyone at the hospital had been deeply worried when they suddenly went missing. Christopher explained that the previous night they had taken both boys to their family's private hospital for a full medical examination. After saying that, he calmly handed the director a detailed medical report. According to the report, both Levi and Jasper appeared to be physically healthy overall. However, several unusual indicators had been discovered. Levi showed an abnormal increase in stem cell activity, while Jasper's tests revealed a strange mismatch between his bone age and what would normally be expected for someone his appearance. Christopher continued by explaining that these strange results had led several specialists at their hospital to reach an astonishing conclusion. Jasper might actually be more than 100 years old. Sean admitted that he himself had never been certain about Jasper's true age. In fact, there was absolutely no information about it anywhere in the hospital archives. He explained that by the time he first started working there, Jasper had already been a patient at the hospital for quite some time. Back then, the previous director had still been in charge. Sean clearly remembered walking up to the bed where Jasper had been lying and carefully examining him. At the time, Jasper had seemed perfectly stable mentally. He had looked like nothing more than a carefree and slightly eccentric young man with a relaxed attitude toward life. Thinking about all of this made Sean feel a little gloomy. After all, he was already 50 years old and constantly worrying about things like gray hair and wrinkles appearing on his face. After a while, Christopher eventually left the hospital. Watching him go, the director quietly reflected on the fact that the young man clearly hadn't believed everything he had said. Still, he thought to himself that young people often acted impulsively and stubbornly. Besides, Christopher was still just a child in many ways. And to make things even more complicated, he was also extremely rich. Meanwhile, the story shifts away to the mountains above the forest, where a black raven was gliding silently through the cold air. The dark bird eventually flew straight into the entrance of a cave and settled down calmly on top of a rough stone inside. It began reporting that the operation involving the larval Tahina had completely failed. The vegetation vessel had been discovered, the ancient founder of the family had awakened, but powerful warriors had quickly appeared and destroyed him. The demon explained that he had clearly sensed the violent energy battle created by the fused 7th-ranked demon, but unfortunately that creature had run into a group of unknown warriors. Because the merged demon had been defeated, all the larvae it had secretly planted inside humans had also died at the same time. The 9th-ranked demon, known as Alligator, spoke coldly, saying that anyone who failed at something that should have been so certain would simply be discarded without hesitation. Nearby, the 9th-ranked demon Polar Kitsune observed everything carefully. She thought to herself that after spending only a few hours studying humans, this foolish crocodile had already started copying human insults, and she certainly had no intention of being outdone by him. Leaning casually against her master's leg, she calmly asked whether they had learned how many warriors were stationed inside that human city after conducting so many reconnaissance missions. The raven responded that the city was always crowded with people. Normally, 3 squads of 8th-ranked warriors guarded the area. These squads were known as Sacred Duty, Rock, and Soul. As far as he knew, they were commanded by a 9th-ranked warrior unit. These forces were considered the strongest defenders of the city, and their leader held the title of a national-level warrior. The fox calmly explained that 8th-ranked warriors were usually roughly equal in strength to 7th-ranked demons. However, no one truly knew how powerful those 9th-ranked warriors, especially the national level one, actually were. At that moment, the demon leader let out a low, threatening hiss. The fox immediately understood his intention. He wanted to send an 8th-ranked demon to scout the city personally. She then loudly announced the king's command, ordering all 8th-ranked demons present to step forward immediately. Soon 5 different 8th-ranked demons appeared before the ruler. Among them were a massive chimpanzee demon, a deadly praying mantis, a fierce tiger, a spiked porcupine, and even a towering kangaroo demon. After carefully observing them for a moment, the king slowly lifted his finger and pointed at one of the demons, choosing him as the one who would carry out the reconnaissance mission. The chosen creature turned out to be an 8th-ranked demon known as the adamantite gorilla. The raven demon added another strange report. He said that during his observations he had also sensed traces of demon scent coming from 2 warriors who had no visible aura. The scent resembled those of the mourning dog, dark python, and reef octopus demons that had disappeared earlier during a reconnaissance mission. The fox found this extremely confusing. She could not understand how ordinary humans could possibly carry the scent of demons. The only logical explanation would be that those individuals were demons disguised in human form. Another possibility briefly crossed her mind, that a human had eaten a demon. However, she quickly dismissed that absurd idea. In their world, demons devoured humans, not the other way around. After thinking it over, she ordered the raven to take 2 demons of the 4th and 5th ranks and investigate further to discover exactly what kind of humans were living there. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to room 666. The usual patients had already returned, and Levi had now been asleep for 3 full days. Jasper was becoming more and more anxious because his friend still had not woken up. Just then, the director walked into the room, and Jasper immediately brightened up with happiness when he saw him. 2 construction workers followed behind him. Sean glanced at Levi lying there and asked Jasper why the boy still hadn't woken up yet. The builders immediately began their work, installing a new toilet in the room. They planned to finish as quickly as possible because the director had promised to pay them double. After all, no worker wanted to stay in that ward for long. Soon they finished installing the bathtub as well. Afterward, the director asked Jasper to stay there and watch over Levi until he finally woke up. Then Sean left the room together with the construction workers, leaving the white-haired boy alone. Jasper looked around in confusion, not really understanding what was happening. Suddenly, he heard strange noises outside, like someone hammering loudly on the door. As it turned out, the builders had actually boarded up the entrance to the ward. They believed that nothing unusual would happen until the Special Forces trainees arrived. Eventually, evening arrived. The one-eyed man suddenly appeared at room 66 through the window and quietly observed the sleeping patients. He mentioned that this year Tracy had decided to send the new recruits to complete their internship at a psychiatric hospital, and they would arrive the day after tomorrow. Sean was also standing in the room. He explained that he had already received the notice about it and had immediately sent back a response, since he believed it was far too dangerous and had refused the request. Instead of replying with words, the one-eyed man calmly pulled a piece of paper from inside his cloak and pushed it right in front of Sean's face. It turned out to be a check containing an enormous amount of money. Seeing that number instantly changed Sean's attitude. He quickly reasoned that danger was something warriors constantly faced, so there was no point resisting. He agreed to begin preparations starting the next day. Meanwhile, the one-eyed man began discussing the mysterious situation of how those 2 boys had somehow gained such incredible strength. Without hesitation, the director pulled out a document, an agreement concerning the transfer of guardianship rights, and handed it directly to the one-eyed man. The man commented that there had never been a case in their unit where psychiatric patients had become warriors, and he suspected that Tracy would probably never allow such a thing. Before long, the Special Forces soldiers finally arrived at the psychiatric hospital. The director greeted Stephen warmly and wished them success during their internship at the hospital. Stephen introduced himself and explained that they were instructors from the Sacred Duty Squad responsible for supervising the trainees this year. The trainees were completely shocked to learn that their instructors would be the legendary warriors of Sacred Duty. At the same time, They couldn't understand why these powerful fighters treated the director of a mental hospital with such respect. Sean calmly explained that he had already received all the documents describing their internship program and politely asked the trainees to follow him. Some of the trainees felt a little uneasy about the situation, but they eventually convinced themselves that the patients here were simply ordinary people with unusual ways of thinking. Because of that, they believed they had nothing to fear. Soon they arrived at their assigned location, where the director explained that their training would involve personally caring for a mentally ill patient for an entire month. If either side caused harm, whether the interns injured the patient or the patient injured them, the internship would immediately be considered a failure. In that case, the trainees would be sent back to the higher academy, where they would have to retrain and retake their final examinations from the beginning. The interns were completely stunned when they heard these strict conditions. However, after the initial shock passed, they quickly convinced themselves that mentally ill patients were just ordinary people and posed no real threat to trained warriors like them. Meanwhile, the hospital director quietly watched their reactions. Deep down, he couldn't help feeling a strong sense of worry about these overconfident young trainees. At the same time, Levi slowly began to regain consciousness. The system reported that during his suspended state he had absorbed enough energy from the surrounding environment, allowing his mid-stage Earth-level energy cultivation technique to recover completely. The moment Jasper saw his friend finally open his eyes, he rushed toward him excitedly, eager to greet him after such a long and worrying sleep. With a relieved smile, Jasper quickly explained that Christopher had been the one who brought them back and given them a ride. He also added that the director had been extremely worried about Levi the entire time. Now that he was finally awake, they should go find him and reassure him that everything was fine. After hearing this, Levi casually moved his arm once, and with almost no effort, he shattered the wooden boards that had been nailed over the doorway like a barrier. Without wasting any more time, Jasper and Levi stepped out of the room together, planning to go find the director and let him know that Levi had recovered. Meanwhile, it was finally time for the interns to be officially assigned to take responsibility for their respective patients. The director introduced one of the interns to his assigned patient, an elderly man who had been living at the hospital for quite some time. The director calmly explained to the patient that this intern would now act like his son for the next month and would stay with him, making sure he was well taken care of. When the old patient heard those words, his eyes immediately filled with tears of overwhelming happiness. He suddenly rushed forward and hugged the confused intern tightly, crying out that he had thought his child had abandoned him forever. The director then handed the intern a set of notes and detailed instructions about the patient's daily care. He explained that these guidelines would be necessary, and now the intern and the security staff would escort the patient back to his ward. Next, the director brought another intern forward and introduced him to a different patient. He explained that this particular patient believed the young man had come specifically to buy watches from him every single day for the next month. The patient's eyes instantly lit up with excitement the moment he heard that. He eagerly grabbed the intern's hand and began shaking it enthusiastically, praising him for making the right decision since he claimed to have an excellent collection of watches available. Soon it was the next patient's turn. The director introduced another intern and explained that the patient believed the young man had come to study under him for the next month as his student. The patient immediately asked the intern whether he had read A Brief History of Time or any other popular science books about astronomy and the universe.